to the reader. The Renaissance movement of humanism marked a profound revival of classical knowledge and individual experience, igniting a spark that led to the Enlightenment. This intellectual awakening emphasized human reason, freedom, and equality, significantly influencing the development of democratic ideals and scientific advancements. The Enlightenment era further propelled these notions, firmly embedding the legacy of humanism into the fabric of contemporary society. Today, this heritage is evident in the ongoing pursuit of knowledge, ethical considerations in technology, and the advocacy for individual rights and freedoms, demonstrating the enduring impact of these philosophical movements. Simultaneously, the mystical and spiritual discipline of alchemy, often misunderstood as merely a precursor to modern chemistry, represents a rich confluence of spiritual, philosophical, and scientific inquiry. Alchemists sought not only the transmutation of base metals into gold, but also the profound transformation of the self, aligning with the humanistic emphasis on personal growth and potential. The spiritual dimension of alchemy, focused on achieving enlightenment and a deeper connection with the divine, mirrors the broader human journey from mysticism to empirical inquiry and rational understanding, without forsaking the intrinsic search for meaning. The evolution of alchemy into modern science signifies a transition from esoteric practices to a systematic exploration of nature's laws, maintaining the spiritual quest for understanding within the realm of empirical knowledge. This evolution reflects a broader narrative of human progress, wherein the spiritual pursuits of alchemy find new expressions in modern psychology, philosophy, and the ethical implications of technological progress. Contemporary society's engagement with mindfulness, ethical living, and sustainable development exemplifies this ongoing quest for a balance between material advancement and spiritual fulfillment. The Emerald Tablet of Hermes, Trismegistus, with its succinct Hermetic wisdom, further enriches this narrative by offering insights into interconnectedness of the soul and nature. The tablet's axiom, as above, so below, as below, so above, encapsulates the idea that the soul's evolution is intrinsically linked to the unfolding of nature itself. Through the lens of the tablet, the soul, considered the prima materia in alchemical tradition, embarks on a transformative journey, mirroring the dynamic processes of natural evolution and cosmic consciousness. This journey of the soul, reflecting the broader natural process, is emblematic of humanity's quest for realization and harmony with the universal order. The imagery of a rarefied yet still corporeal universal salt sprinkling onto the earth from space serves as a metaphor for divine or cosmic essence catalyzing transformation within the natural world and the soul. This suggests that both the material and spiritual realms are nourished by the same celestial influences, reinforcing the deep connection between individual development and the evolutionary processes of the cosmos. In conclusion, weaving together the narratives of humanism, the Enlightenment, alchemy, and the Emerald Tablet offers a holistic understanding of humanity's place in the universe. This integrated perspective underscores the interconnectedness of material and spiritual realms, the empirical and the intuitive, highlighting the shared journey towards knowledge, enlightenment, and unity. The enduring legacy of these philosophical and spiritual traditions continues to inspire the quest for a deeper understanding of the human condition and our cosmic destiny. Within the rich narrative of human intellectual and spiritual evolution, marked by the profound insights of humanism, the Enlightenment, and the mystical depths of alchemy, lies the subtle but powerful influence of secret societies. These enigmatic collectives, woven into the fabric of the later Middle Ages and the early modern period, mirror the transformative quest of alchemy and the intellectual rigor of the Enlightenment. Through their veiled practices and guarded knowledge, these societies have silently steered the course of history, much like the hidden processes of nature that guide the unfolding of life itself. The secretive nature of these organizations reflects the alchemical principle of transformation in obscurity, where profound changes occur away from the prying eyes of the uninitiated. Just as the alchemists pursued the transmutation of base metals into gold through arcane processes, secret societies sought the metamorphosis of society and the individual through the accumulation and application of esoteric knowledge. Their rituals, symbols, and teachings, steeped in ancient wisdom, function as a catalyst for personal and societal enlightenment, echoing the humanist call for individual growth and potential. In this clandestine pursuit of enlightenment, secret societies have embodied the dual heritage of alchemy's spiritual quest and the Enlightenment's valorization of reason and liberty. Organizations such as the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn have been the custodians of a hidden stream of knowledge, flowing through the undercurrents of European intellectual life. These societies have not only safeguarded ancient wisdom, but have also been instrumental in fostering innovations and ideas that have shaped the modern world. Their influence extends beyond the philosophical and into the realms of politics, science, and the arts, serving as a bridge between the mystical and the rational, the hidden and the manifest. The impact of secret societies in nurturing the ideals of freedom, equality, and fraternity has subtly permeated various revolutionary movements, quietly aligning with the broader aspirations of humanity for progress and enlightenment. Thus, the exploration of secret societies unfolds as a natural extension of the intellectual and spiritual journey of humanity. Their stories intertwine with the quest for deeper understanding and the transcendence of conventional boundaries, a testament to the enduring human aspiration to explore the unknown and to forge new paths toward a more enlightened world. In this context, secret societies emerge not as outliers, but as integral players in the grand tapestry of human evolution, contributing to the ongoing narrative of growth, transformation, and the search for ultimate truth. In the tapestry of Western esoteric tradition, the Rosicrucians emerge as a pivotal thread, weaving through the fabric of spiritual, intellectual, and scientific evolution. Originating in the early 17th century, this enigmatic society announced its presence through manifestos that sparked the imagination of Europe, blending Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism into a rich philosophical quilt. Their literature promised a universal reformation of mankind, suggesting a profound connection to hidden streams of knowledge and an esoteric understanding of the cosmos. The Rosicrucians' philosophy, deeply imbued with alchemical symbolism and pursuit of enlightenment, positioned them as harbingers of a new age. Their works hinted at a harmonious blend of science and spirituality, prophesying an era where knowledge would liberate humanity from ignorance and superstition. This vision aligned closely with the burgeoning European Enlightenment and scientific revolution, suggesting that the Rosicrucians, whether as a formal organization or as an inspirational ideal, played a role in catalyzing intellectual awakening. Central to the Rosicrucian allure is the symbolic representation of alchemical processes, not merely as chemical transformations, but as spiritual allegories. The magnum opus, or the great work, symbolizes the alchemist's journey towards spiritual perfection and enlightenment, mirroring the society's deeper aspirations. This metaphorical journey underscores the Rosicrucians' dedication to preserving alchemical texts and practices as esoteric knowledge, accessible only to those initiated into their mysteries. The duality of Enlightenment organizations like the Rosicrucians as both conservators of ancient wisdom and agents of change underscores their unique place in history. They foster conditions conducive to intellectual and spiritual awakenings, influencing key figures and events in science, philosophy, and the arts. Their work suggests a profound belief in the power of concealed knowledge to transform society, hinting at a future epoch where these hidden truths would be fully revealed. In contemporary times, the resurgence of interest in alchemy and esoteric traditions speaks to a broader societal yearning for meaning beyond the material. The potential unveiling of hidden alchemical knowledge beckons with promises of profound implications for modern science, spirituality, and societal development. It posits these Enlightenment organizations as guides toward a new era of understanding and transformation, wherein the ancient wisdom sects and similar bodies illuminate the path forward. The enduring legacy of these societies, with their blend of alchemical and Enlightenment ideals, highlights the importance of concealed knowledge during periods of intellectual stagnation. Their existence and persistence serve as catalysts for periods of rapid growth and transformation, emphasizing the continuous relevance of their hidden wisdom in the contemporary quest for spiritual and intellectual enlightenment. Reflecting upon their contributions, we are reminded the timeless value of seeking knowledge, the power of hidden truths to inspire change, and the unending human pursuit of understanding our place in the cosmos. Book I, The Doctrine of Spiritual Alchemy. From antiquity, we have inherited definite traditions concerning magic, astrology, and alchemy. The magic of the ancients, now termed variously mental science, Christian science, metaphysical science, and New Thought, is today being used with satisfactory results by many esteemed people. Astrology is the foundation upon which has been erected in the course of time the modern science of astronomy, as astrology, furthermore, It is helping an ever-widening circle of humanity to overcome the difficulties offered by life. Like magic and astrology, alchemy was laughed at by the schoolmen until the 20th century gave indisputable proof of transmutation in his own laboratory. Transmutation and the flying machine, as the older generation well remembers, were the two standing jokes. Anyone interested in either was supposed to be ridiculously credulous. But transmutation can now be produced at will by our chemists. Magic under another name is gaining in popularity, and astrology is being verified by thousands every day. It is time, therefore, that someone should seriously set forth a clear exposition of what the ancient alchemists really thought and taught. The learning of the ancients, insofar as it existed outside secret occult orders, was collected in the Alexandrian Library. This library was begun by Ptolemy I in the 3rd century BC and was added to in great measure by Ptolemy II. With the ascendancy of Christianity, no pains were spared to destroy every record, monument, or scroll of more ancient times, either in the fear that it would contradict the Bible or in the belief that it was pagan. The second library in the Serapeum was completely destroyed when the Christians sacked that temple in 390 A.D. The main library also disappeared under persistent hostile influences, the Mohammedans, when they gained the power, finishing the work of destruction commenced earlier by the Christians. Libraries elsewhere met a similar fate at the hands of Christian bigots and Mohammedan fanatics. But though libraries were destroyed, the statuary wrecked, and the evidence of ancient culture largely erased, not all of the scrolls were consigned to the flames. Some found their way to secret safe sanctuary in the heart of the Arabian desert. From thence, at a later date, mathematics, magic, astrology, and alchemy found their way to Europe. The word alchemy, therefore, is Arabic, being derived from Ai, the enchymia, hidden or occult. To the Arabians, alchemy was the science of hidden properties and essences. It dealt with the occult attributes of things. It is nevertheless linked up through association with the art of transmutation, for a long line of alchemical experimenters sought to change base metals into gold. In addition, they sought the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, and the accomplishment of the great work. The sciences, brought to Europe by Arabian scholars, were not universally welcomed. Certain monks, like Placidus de Titus, expounder of the semiarch system of directing, were fortunate enough to be allowed to delve deeply into astrology. Magic, of course, was widely frowned upon. Friar Roger Bacon and certain others made notable discoveries while conducting alchemical experiments, but all such delving into nature's mysteries was commonly considered to be a matter that depended upon trafficking with the devil. Inside the sacred precincts of the church, it was occasionally permitted, but any delving by outsiders met quick disapproval of the ecclesiastics. It was not an age of free speech. It was an age of terrorism to anyone guilty of discovering some fact at variance with the teachings of established religion. Spiritual one truths could not openly be proclaimed. If they were to be conveyed to another, a secret, code must be used to escape the accusation of heresy. Otherwise, the torture chamber awaited. The language of symbolism. Not all alchemists, however, were interested in searching out the origin, destiny, and history of the human soul. Some there were who sought to make gold that might be exchanged for coin of the realm. Those that found this secret felt an obligation to society. They knew that should the process be learned by unscrupulous persons, it might well upset the economic relations of the world and enable knaves and criminals, through vast wealth easily acquired, to rule and oppress more honest men. Against this, they must guard by keeping the method a secret. Because they were secretive about a matter of such tremendous importance to the selfish ambitions of others, they often were sadly persecuted. Some were murdered by villains in the expectation that the recipe for making gold would be found about their persons or concealed in their lodgings. Others were haled before feudal lords and potentates with the demand that they make gold. Refusing this, they were imprisoned and promised freedom only at the price of the secret process. Not a few were tortured, and some were killed, in the effort to compel them to perform transmutations or to reveal how it was done. Take it all in all. Whatever they may have gained through the possession of alchemical knowledge, they well paid for in lack of peace and comfort. For they have been hounded from place to place no less than the traditional wandering Jew. They lived in an age antedating science. No terminology as yet existed for expressing many of their ideas in ordinary language. Words were coined, therefore, to meet the demands of the occasion. Thus it came about, as a little reading of the alchemical works left by them makes obvious, that the same thing was called by a different name by different alchemists. This at first sight is very confusing, but it need not remain so, for in common language we have different words called synonyms to express the same idea. What we must do to understand the writings is to determine the basic idea that may be expressed by a variety of these synonyms. They wish to conceal their knowledge from the vulgar and to reveal it to the worthy. It often served to protect them from the designing to talk, write, and act as if mentally unsound. They needed a code to convey information, and such a code came to them ready at hand from the same source as came the science of alchemy. Astrology and alchemy arrived in Europe together. A language that was applicable to one was likewise applicable to the other. Astrology teaches that everything on earth has its correspondence in the sky, and everything in the sky has its correspondence on the earth. This is the key to alchemical synonyms. A thing on earth is ruled by a planet or sign in the sky. This planet or sign rules other things on the earth having the same vibratory quality. The principle or quality or spiritual bias designated by an alchemist may be called by the name of any one of the various familiar objects ruled by the same astrological influence. Thus did the alchemists write and talk and think in the language of celestial correspondences. Different kinds of alchemy. There is a great similarity to be found in the language used and in the methods of procedure advocated by alchemists living in different centuries and in different lands. One who delves into the rare and musty tomes still extant concerning the Hermetic art, as it was called by these sages, cannot fail to be struck by the parallel methods of those who obviously sought different ends. A sifting of their writings reveals that some wanted mineral gold with which to buy leisure, comfort, and luxury, and with which, perhaps, to help the poor. Some, however, had no thought of this, but labored to transmute bodily fluids and forces into magnetic power with which to perform wonders. Knowing nothing of the yogis, they yet desired to do the things the yogis are reputed to do. Some worked solely with the vegetable kingdom, some with animals, and still others sought to establish an ecstatic rapport with the source of all life. Light and love to the end of transmuting the gross trials of life into golden spiritual treasures. Process always the same. In spite of the wide variety of ends sought, the principles followed, and the succession of steps must be the same in all transmutation. A process carried out on one plane gives the same result as when carried out on another plane, except that the result as well as the process is on a different level. The tones C, G, and E sounded in combination on one instrument and in one octave give a resultant chord that is similar to C. G and E sounded in combination in another octave on the same instrument, in the same octave on a different kind of instrument, or in another octave on another instrument. The same combination of tone vibrations produces a similar result whatever the instrument or whatever the octave, but it may be on a different vibratory plane. Likewise, the combination of alchemical elements by means of similar processes gives the same result if carried out in the mineral kingdom, in the world of vegetation, in the mental economy of man, or in the realm of spiritual potencies. The only real difference is that the result as well as the operation is on a different plane. To state the matter mathematically, let us call certain definite things on one plane A, B, C, and 10th, then the things on any other plane having the same astral vibration or rulership, let us call A, B, C, and X. A has the same astrological vibration as A, B the same as B, C the same as C, and X the same as 10th then if A plus B plus C equal X. It follows that A plus B plus C must equal X. What the things are on one plane that correspond to definite things on another plane may be determined through their astrological rulership. Everything in existence on any plane vibrates in its inner alchemical nature to some astrological tone. Spiritual transmutation. In Course IX, I have considered the mental plane and show how to bring about those mental transmutations that conduce to material happiness and success. But now it is the spiritual plane that interests us. The word spirit comes to us from the Latin. Spirare, meaning to breathe. It connotes the breath of life. As used here, it signifies the inmost principle. Spiritual alchemy, therefore, is concerned with the most interior plane. It works to transmute that which is commonly gross into spiritual gold. Now what can spiritual gold be? This we must find out by applying the law of correspondences. It is said that gold is the most perfect of all metals. Therefore, spiritual gold, as applied to man, must be the most perfect part of his constitution. Gold is extremely malleable and ductile. Consequently, we must seek a Humayoni principle that adapts itself to numerous states and conditions. Gold is practically indestructible, so that which we seek in man must be eternal. Gold is not tarnished, nor is it readily attacked by other chemical elements. Let us then explore human existence for an unchangeable element that remains pure and resists the acids of criticism and the fires of affliction. Gold is a precious metal that is used as a standard of value. What is the standard of value in man? This auriferous principle cannot be the body, for the body is neither changeless nor durable, but easily corroded by external influences. It cannot be the soul, for the soul is affected by all that man contacts. The most characteristic thing about the soul, the sum total of experiences that persist as mind, is its ceaseless change and movement. The ego, however, answers all requirements. What the sun is to astrology, and gold to economics and industry, the ego is to individual man. It is an imperishable spark of deity. It is male a bili, for it adapts itself to the requirements of every form of life through which the soul in its journey passes. It is ductile, for its vital rays reach out to energize the soul wherever the soul may sojourn. It is not tarnished by contact with external life, nor does it deteriorate when exposed to the acids of criticism or the fires of affliction. It is man's most precious possession. It is the standard, likewise, of the value of human life. For in so much as the ego expresses itself through the character, the noble qualities are made manifest and the man attains true greatness. The ego, undoubtedly, then, is spiritual gold. Yet as the ego already exists, a spiritual potency supplying energy to the soul as the sun supplies light to the moon. What need is there for transmutation? Reading the works of the alchemists, we find that there are two kinds of gold. There is natural gold, and there is transmuted gold. And these alchemists assert that the transmuted gold is far finer than that found in a natural state. Furthermore, they maintain that it takes gold to make gold, and that some natural gold must be supplied before transmutation is possible. The ego, according to Hermetic tradition, is unable to contact the physical plane directly. During its involution, it descends only as far as the boundary of the sixth and seventh state of the spiritual world. From thence it sends the dual souls on the further journey to contact external conditions and adapts itself to the astral and physical planes by the rays of vitality that it sends to the souls. These souls experiencing life on the external plane may raise the vibrations of their mental states to a point where energy is communicated not only to the astral plane, but also to the spiritual level. Such vibratory rates experienced by an individual affect spiritual substance and may build up a spiritual body. This spiritual body is composed of the substance of the plane occupied by the ego. Like the ego, it is relatively imperishable, and it partakes in great measure of the other qualities of the ego. It is not natural gold, but transmuted gold. This imperishable spiritual body persists after the second death, which takes place in the astral realm. In this transmuted gold of the spiritual alchemist, the soul must finally function if it is to survive. It is finer and more valuable than the ego because while the ego is imperishable, such a golden form provides for the persistence of self-consciousness. Immortality of a kind is already assured to the ego, but by the addition of this transmuted gold, it acquires a value it did not have before. It has acquired the priceless treasure of self-conscious immortality, the metals of spiritual alchemy. The material alchemist works with the common minerals, such as copper, lead, tin, and iron, in the endeavor to change them into a metal more valuable. The mental alchemist follows similar principles, but the elements with which he works are his thoughts. He seeks to flux them, one against the other, reduce them in the astral light, and recombine them in a mental gold that will attract to him ability, wealth, power, and success. The spiritual alchemist goes a step still further. In fact, he takes the highest step possible to embodied man. He uses as his metals the various experiences of life. If some are not at hand that are necessary for this transmutation, he seeks them out. He purifies them, fluxes them in proper proportion, dissolves them in the spiritual light by the aid of a reverberatory furnace, and if the resultant transmutation is successful, comes into possession of a golden chariot in which his soul may wing its heavenly flight through boundless time and eternity. The reverberatory furnace. One of the most essential features of the laboratory of any chemist or alchemist is some means of increasing the vibratory rate of the materials upon which he works. On the material plane, when the vibratory rate of the molecules of matter is increased, the object is said to be gaining in temperature. That is, heat is an increase in the vibratory rate of matter. If the heat be increased still further until the object glows, and thus emits light, the molecules have reached an intensity of vibration that enables them to affect a substance interior to matter. For light is not a vibration of matter, but a movement in the ether. If a vibratory rate existing in the ether is greatly increased, in a like manner energy is imparted to the substance next interior to it. Astral substance is thus set in motion, and effects are produced on the astral plane. This is the plane of substance in which memory resides. It is the plane occupied by the unconscious mind while embodied, and by the soul immediately after death. By our thoughts, we build on the astral plane. If the vibratory rate of our thoughts is still further increased, these motions in astral substance, following the same general process, reach an intensity in which they impart their motion to the plane next interior to them. As a bar of iron, when it reaches a certain temperature, emits light, which is an effect in a substance interior to matter, so a man's thoughts, when sufficiently raised in their vibratory rate, impart motion to the substance next interior to the astral. By these thoughts or mental attitudes that have their vibration intensified in a marked manner, man can build upon the spiritual plane. By them, he can construct a spiritual body in which to function after death without a preparatory sojourn on the astral plane. Commonly, after death, man continues his progress on the astral plane for a long time, while he gradually acquires the ability to raise his consciousness to an intensity that enables it to build up a spiritual body. But the spiritual alchemist expects to skip this extensive astral sojourn. While yet on earth, he does the work that most accomplish only long after death. He builds a spiritual body while yet occupying the physical form. The mere raising of the vibratory rates does not result in transmutation. It does enable the substance of an interior plane to be affected. Thoughts sufficiently intensified do affect spiritual substance, but they may or may not build an immortal spiritual body. A form to be immortal must have a high degree of perfection. All its parts must be there. They must be there in proper proportions, but transmutation is not possible without. In addition to the proper ingredients that have been fully purified and present in the right amounts, there being a marked increase in vibration. Proper fluxing the materials assists is making it possible to raise their vibrations. But in addition to this, heat must be applied to the substances. Some kind of furnace is essential to both the chemist and the alchemist. A reverberatory furnace enables the metallurgist to obtain the heat necessary to melt his ores. Such a furnace is equally valuable to the alchemist. By its means, very high temperatures are produced. On the mental plane, of course, it is a mental reverberatory furnace. The necessary vibration, or heat, is produced by controlling the feelings that accompany the thoughts. As molecular motion is the vibratory agent of the furnace on the physical plane, so the feeling of pleasure or pain is the vibratory agent used by the mental alchemist to control the conditions of the astral plane. The spiritual alchemist, who operates on the experiences of life, follows a similar plan. He uses to control and determine effects on the spiritual plane, not merely pleasure and pain, but still higher and more interior vibratory rates known as aspiration and inspiration. This reverberatory furnace of the spiritual alchemist has a heat, or energy, or vibration of a very definite kind. To be sure, it is feeling, but a feeling that arises from unusual spiritual perception. This spiritual perception embraces the all of life. It recognizes the universe as an organic whole, moving toward intelligible ends. It views itself as one unit of the cosmic plan. And the desire arises to assist in the great universal work of progress, as insatiable longing is present to use every faculty and power to advance the welfare of all. A relation is established between the soul and the universe. It is felt that nothing, not even life itself, is quite so important as contributing something to the general good. It is a feeling, but it derives from the spiritual plane. It enters into rapport with the divine in nature. There is a higher state of consciousness. The heart overflows with a zealous religious devotion to cosmic prosperity. This reverberatory furnace of the spiritual alchemist is fed by an outpouring of love. Nothing raises the vibrations as quickly as love. It is the love of the oxygen of the air for the carbon in the fuel that gives the material furnace its intensity. Love operates on various planes, but only unselfish love affects spiritual substance. Any exalted and unselfish love has this power. The love of a mother for her babe, of a man for his mate, or a welfare worker for her charges may have this exalted and unselfish quality. More often, however, these are too mixed with the coarser rates derived from ambition, possession, or passion to affect spiritual substance. But the love of God and his works, when devoutly felt, lifts the soul above all that is sordid. A higher state of consciousness is experienced. The adoration of deity and the thirsting to be of utmost service in his scheme of things provides the spiritual alchemist with a furnace that may ever be relied upon, the laboratory. In the writings of nearly all alchemists, there appears a reference to the place of gold in nature. It is one of their cardinal doctrines. Irenaeus Philolethes states it more clearly and concisely than most. He says, all metallic seed is the seed of gold, for gold is the intention of nature in regard to all metals. If the base metals are not gold, it is only through some accidental hindrance. They are all potentially gold. The alchemists thus consider gold the climax of metallic evolution. Souls undergoing their journey through the cycle of necessity, when they first incarnate in the metallic realm, enter the lowest and basest form. By means of their experiences in this lower metal, they acquire the ability, when this metal runs its life course, of attracting to themselves and incarnating in the form of a more complex or higher metal. When a metal decomposes and releases its astral counterpart, this counterpart undergoes a period of assimilation of its experiences. In due time, it is carried along by the life wave to a new metallic incarnation, this time entering a metal a step higher in the scale of evolution. Its experiences in lower or less complex forms give it the ability to function in a form of higher construction. This process continues, according to the alchemists, until at last it reaches the highest and most perfect metal. It becomes incarnated in gold. Gold is the highest form or principle possible to any particular realm. And because all souls are evolving on the plane they occupy toward its highest state, it is, as Philolethes says, the intention of nature in regard to all metals. If they have not yet reached this highest state or condition, it is because they have not yet had sufficient experience to mold about themselves a golden form. This is an accidental hindrance. They are all potentially gold. The same thought, encompassing a vastly wider scope, was stated by a Hermetic master. Every immortal soul is the seed of a universe. In this, he has gone even above the plane of spiritual alchemy, for he is dealing with the alchemy of the angelic state. Having accomplished the great work, he was looking to the plane next above his own level, and imparting his conception of what he there saw to one still below who was struggling yet with the problems of spiritual transmutation. All souls are the seed of spiritual gold. They are undergoing those experiences, slowly or rapidly, by which ultimately they will be able to build about themselves a perfect spiritual form. It is the intention of nature that they become immortal, and unless some untoward circumstance arises, ultimately they will arrive at that exalted state. Their experiences with life may as yet all be base metal, and mostly dross at that. Nevertheless, there is a grain of pure gold within. It is the eternal ego. In due time, under the slow processes of nature, all will be changed into gold. But the spiritual alchemist does not wish to await the slow and ponderous workings of unaided nature. The fact that in centuries to come she will ultimately convert all his metals into gold is interesting philosophically and scientifically, but it does not satisfy his present ambition. He has no desire to await a long process by which additional experiences may be had on the astral plane, and through which these and earthly experiences may be more fully assimilated. If he is to have an immortal spiritual body, why wait perhaps countless eons? Instead of permitting nature to do it all in her deliberate way, why not help her? Why not accelerate the process and by intelligently directed effort, build up this immortal form so that he may have it now? This is what the spiritual alchemist determines to do. He, like other alchemists, must have a laboratory in which to labor. The laboratory of any alchemist is determined largely by the kind of work at hand. The material alchemist must have a place where he may keep his furnace, cupels, chemical reagents, retorts, crucibles, test tubes, fluxes, and the metals upon which he experiments. But the spiritual alchemist needs a more comprehensive laboratory. The metals with which he works are the experiences of life. His materials he collects from the whole domain of nature. These he converts to his uses in the laboratory of his own soul. Salt, mercury, and sulfur, not because I shall refer to them thus in these lessons, but because they appear in the writings of nearly all alchemists, some explanation should be made of salt, mercury, and sulfur. It is a cardinal principle laid down by all that these three are the elementary constituents of everything. The most familiar example of crystallization is that of salt. When Lot's wife, as related in the Bible, looked back, she crystallized. So does anyone who becomes so attached to present objects and conditions that he does not look ahead in the direction of progress. Salt is extensively used. Because of its recognized state of crystallization, it becomes a universal symbol of the physical. The physical body is the salt of the alchemist. Of things that burn with great heat, sulfur is widely recognized. Lakes of fire and brimstone are alluded to from the pulpit. Sulfur, because of its association with intense heat, becomes the symbol of fire. Within all life, there's a spark of the divine fire. This eternal spark of deity that furnishes the energy to impel the soul ever onward in its toilsome journey through the vastness of life is well represented by a more than common fire. The indwelling spirit is the sulfur of the alchemist. No wonder the alchemists must conceal under universal symbols their ideas from the church. For they believed and taught that not only man, but everything possessed of life has not merely a body, but a spirit and a soul. The function of this evolving soul is to penetrate the realm of form and gather those experiences that ultimately becomes love and wisdom. Quicksilver penetrates quickly where water will not go. It may be strained through a chamois skin bag. Of amazing activity, its globules run hither and thither and actually gather up or amalgamate with precious metals. It is like the intellect in its activity and power of acquisition. Mercury is a universal symbol to the alchemist. When mentioned in relation to salt and sulfur, it signifies the soul, the first matter. Schoolmen well could laugh at the alchemical doctrine of the first matter, so long as the various elements of chemistry remained indivisible. Now, however, they know that the ancient alchemists were right, for all the so-called elements are composed of electrons and protons in various combinations, and these latter seem to be negative and positive charges of electricity. So far as physical substance is concerned, the ether, of which both electrons and protons are composed, is the first matter, or universal solvent. The difference between one chemical element and another is the number and arrangement of the electrons and protons composing their atoms. Our heaviest metal is uranium. That is, it has the greatest number of electrons and protons. It is a rather unstable element, and in nature breaks down to become radium. Radium, in turn, breaks down to produce lead. Our chemists now tell us as the atomic weight of uranium is 238 and its atomic number is 92 that its nucleus contains 238 protons. Its nucleus also carries 146 electrons, the other 92 electrons, to make up the 238 necessary to balance the 238 protons. Are free electrons revolving about the nucleus as planets revolve about the sun. From an atom of uranium, remove 10 free protons, and the result is an atom of lead. Remove 13 of the free protons from uranium, and the result is gold. From uranium, take 91 free protons, and the result is the simplest of all atoms. It is hydrogen, consisting of one electron revolving around one proton. The usual approach of the alchemist to the problem of transmutation, however, was not the attempt to knock free protons from an atom having more than the desired metal. Instead, the attempt was made to build up the precious metal by bringing together, under proper circumstances, other metals that would furnish electrons and protons in proper number and under such conditions that these protons and electrons would enter into combination in the numerical proportions of the desired metal. If gold was desired, it was necessary to furnish 197 protons and 197 electrons, although not all the electrons and protons of metals thus brought to the combination might enter into the final product. Enough must be available that would enter into the process to build up the necessary 197 pairs. But merely bringing together silver and lead and tin and other ingredients does not produce gold. The proper ingredients must be present in certain proportions. It is true. But before being transformed into gold, they must be reduced to a state which makes recombination of the protons and electrons possible. This is called reducing them to the first matter. The energy used in the process is variously called the universal solvent, the alkahest, the Sophie fire, the supreme secret of alchemy, azoth, and the water of Pythia. In metallic alchemy, the first matter is, of course, the ether, and the force applied must be of an etheric nature. It must be an energy which is capable of temporarily overcoming the affinity of the protons and electrons for each other. These building blocks of the atom must be freed from their present attractions so that they may recombine in a different arrangement. In spiritual alchemy, we are dealing with something still more recondite. We are dealing with spiritual elements. They therefore must be reduced to their spiritual components. That is, a force must be applied that so overcomes their previous internal attachments that they are free to recombine in a different arrangement. This energy, for want of a better name, we term the spiritual light. To better illustrate what I mean, let us have recourse to simple mathematics. Let us suppose, for example, that the transcendent gold for which we seek is represented by the number 1. The alchemist, then, let us say, has at hand only fractions, representing the other elements from which synthetically he hopes to produce gold. After much research and study, he may decide that there are 3 fractions in his possession that, if properly combined, will give him the desired gold. Let us assume these 3 fractions, representing metals, are 1/2, 1/3, and 1/6. Each of these fractions is a distinct numerical element, differing from the other 2. Try as we may, we find it impossible to combine them, while they still express their individuality, into one element. Merely to add them as they stand is to produce only a mechanical mixture. Thus do metals, if added together without being first reduced to the first matter, unite, not in transmutation, but in an alloy. But if we reduce these 3 fractions to their first matter, to a common denominator, they may be added together to give a new and distinct individuality. That is, they may be transmuted. Thus reduced 1/2 becomes 6/12, 1/3 becomes 4/12, and 1/6 becomes 2/12. Now added together, the sum is 12/12. This is no longer spoken of as a fraction, but as the integer, number 1. Here the number 12 is the universal solvent. The alkahest on the mental plane is the astral light. On the spiritual plane, it is the spiritual light. As in this instance, we reduce to 12ths. So in like manner, the alchemist operating on any plane seeks to reduce his metals by using the common denominator, or water of Pythia, of that plane, the philosopher's stone. The chief ends sought by alchemists in various ages and climes were 4 in number. 1, to perform transmutation. 2, to obtain the philosopher's stone. 3, to find the elixir of life. 4, to accomplish the great work. The philosopher's stone, according to repute, is a stone that has the power of transforming all it touches into gold. As the gold we seek is spiritual permanence, and the base metals upon which we operate are the experiences of life as they are gathered day after day, our philosopher's stone, as spiritual alchemists, must be something that, touching any experience of life, can transform it into a permanent spiritual treasure. It must be capable of giving it the quality that is necessary for it to persist as a component of the immortal spiritual body on the plane, yet above the astral. One thing there is that is changeless. That is gold. One thing there is also that touching other things makes them partake of its all-enduring quality. When truth is pressed against them, the eternal principles expressed by things are revealed, and thus are objects and forces transformed through the process of spiritual understanding, from base objects or experiences into the gold of their underlying spiritual nature. The truth that sets you free is the touchstone of alchemy, but as an intellectual process, it has no freeing power. The truth of any object, experience, or force embraces a full comprehension of its various relations. Truth is correct knowledge. This correct knowledge embraces a comprehension of the relation of the thing to all other entities and forces. It embraces a correct knowledge of the relation of the thing to God, to man, and to the universe. It reveals its true spiritual significance in the life of man. Such truth is a freeing and transmuting power, for when the spiritual relations are completely realized, there is more than an intellectual perception. There is also present an emotion, a feeling of the stupendous privilege of life, and deep gratitude for its glorious opportunities. When correct knowledge is fully realized within there, springs into existence as a component part of it, as the things inevitably conditioned by its presence, a deep aspiration, and an unutterable longing and determination for a higher and better method of living. This truth is the philosopher's stone, the elixir vitae. The fountain of eternal youth has been sought in many lands. The alchemists, instead of exploring the earth in the hope of finding it ready prepared by nature, undertook its manufacture. They diligently worked to prepare a fluid which they styled the elixir of life, in which to bathe and indefinitely prolong both youth and existence. With the philosopher's stone, they would change other metals into gold. But to be able to enjoy this gold, they must have life. To reap its advantages in fullness, old age must be defeated and death defied. Therefore, to perpetually rejuvenate themselves, they must prepare this most precious elixir. It was the policy of these alchemists, whatever they sought, to follow closely, those striving to accelerate the processes of nature. Watching her, they could only decide that life wherever found springs into existence through the interaction of positive and negative potencies. Where sex is not, there is no life. The atom of matter, which we discuss in relation to its protons and electrons, depends for its life and continued existence upon love. Protons are positive charges of electricity, and electrons are negative charges of electricity. They attract each other strongly. So powerful is this love between them that if the energy thus stored in a little water or a little earth could be utilized, it would turn the wheels of industry. Only by overcoming the love between protons and electrons is the atom of matter destroyed. Mineral crystals are sensitive to poison, grow, and reproduce themselves. They are made up of atoms. These crystals continue their lives until, through age or other polarizing forces, the love of the atoms for one another is overcome. When such attractions cease, the crystal disintegrates. In the vegetable kingdom, also, the power of growth and duration depends upon the strength of the attraction between the cells and their love for the nutritive materials carried to them by circulating fluids. All life, thought, and activity are the result of sex. Sex expresses itself as movement, as fire, as passion, as enthusiasm, and as exalted, unselfish love. It is convertible. It may be base and ignoble, or it may ascend to the very throne of divinity, but wherever there is life, there is some form of love. The alchemist, then, perceiving that life is dependent on love, concludes that spiritual life must depend on a spiritual love, and that immortal life must depend on an immortal love. And what so? Quickly can restore youth as love? Even the surgeons endeavoring to restore youth and prolong physical existence by transplanting tissues utilize in a material way this principle, for they use the glands associated with love. The problem of the spiritual alchemist who seeks the coveted elixir thus becomes clear-cut and definite. Life depends on love, and immortal life in a spiritual realm depends on an enduring spiritual love. It is this love that he seeks to find, the great work. Many think that the possession of the fruit of the great work comes by chance, that it comes without much effort, or that it is given by nature to the unworthy. My own observation of life convinces me that this is a pernicious fallacy. The very few whom I have known who came into its possession certainly well merited any blessing that life could offer. Invariably, they had accomplished some important task for the welfare of society. Through their interest in and concern for the advancement of others, they had blended the finer emotional elements within themselves into the precious elixir of life. They already had quaffed the immortal fluid. The alchemists, also, must have been convinced that it comes only as a result of some special effort. Otherwise, they would not have called it a work, but a recreation. This great work, about which so much has been written, is the reunion of twin souls in the spiritual realm. As such, is the highest result of spiritual alchemy, because after thus united, their potencies expand, and they move from the highest level of the spiritual plane to angelic vistas that are beyond them, imagination of embodied man. The union that results from the accomplishment of the great work is more than a fusion of the spiritual bodies that already have been constructed by each. It is a permanent union of souls. No such fusion, even of spiritual bodies, can take place until there are spiritual bodies to fuse. How can there be any recognition of a spiritual union by those who as yet have not expanded their consciousness sufficiently to contact the spiritual plane? The greatest truth may, by its very greatness, be the most potent snare when misunderstood. Feeling an intense attraction for another, it is easy to imagine the soulmate has been found. Most such affinities are merely the result of magnetic attractions. The great work can only take place when an active soul is capable of functioning in a well-constructed spiritual body. Few people have, as yet, such active souls, or such fully formed spiritual bodies. When such a spiritual body has been constructed by an active soul, there is no need to wander about looking for the soulmate, for by virtue of this spiritual activity alone, they are bound to be attracted one to the other. Therefore, let those who long for the soulmate learn that mere wishing and seeking will never suffice, for it is an accomplishment requiring the utmost spiritual effort. Let them remember that alchemists call this reunion of twin souls the great work. The first step in its accomplishment is to build up the spirituality. This is the task of spiritual alchemy, the 7 spiritual metals. The conception of life held by the spiritual alchemist is quite different from that ordinarily held by the man of affairs. The events that spring into existence as the result of his contact with external environment are viewed from an entirely different angle. Instead of being considered in reference to their value as factors contributing to physical survival and physical gratification, they are scanned from the height of their cosmic relations. Their worth is estimated by the measure in which they further the development of the soul and are of assistance in cosmic welfare. Through illustration, let us draw this line of demarcation clearly. From the material point of view, for instance, a man is considered to be unusually lucky when he inherits a fortune. It is common to speak of a man as highly successful when he has obtained eminence in the political field, and a man who builds up a large and prosperous business is deemed one to be envied. View of the spiritual alchemist. But the spiritual alchemist jumps to no such hasty conclusions. He realizes that if we are ever to appraise anything justly, we must look deeply beneath the surface of appearances. Things are often not what they seem first glance. After all, environment and circumstances are effective only as the individual responds to them. The good and the evil reside not in events and external conditions, but in the effect they have upon the individual. The development of character is more important than physical gratification. Therefore, before saying of any event that it is fortunate or unfortunate, the spiritual alchemist first looks to the more important factor, which is its effect upon the character, its contribution to the growth of the soul. A material fortune may be used as an aid to soul progress, but observation inclines to the belief that more often than not it is a spiritual hindrance, therefore, alchemically a misfortune. A high political station sometimes engenders bigotry, pride, and arrogance, and is then alchemically a failure, and so prosperous a business as to keep the attention absorbed by worldly affairs to the exclusion of intellectual and spiritual interests, reveals to the alchemist a condition that excites pity rather than envy. Not, it should be clearly understood, that the spiritual alchemist believes wealth, business, political station, or other worldly affairs evil. To him, events, worldly affairs, or other interests are neither good nor evil, fortunate nor unfortunate in themselves. They become good or evil only through their influence on soul culture. But quite often the things mentioned become unfortunate in individual cases because they are permitted to impair the development of the soul and hamper its progress. The cosmic man. The spiritual alchemist conceives the universe to be an immense organic structure, or cosmic man. He perceives that individual souls are evolving from lower to higher states, and entering into rapport with the whole cosmic scheme, he apprehends that a like process is going on in it, and that the universe also is evolving and eternally unfolding its infinite possibilities of expression. In tune with the pulsating heart of nature, an inner conviction floods his consciousness that every immortal soul plays a part and has its function in this glorious scheme of creation. It is a living conscious cell within the body of infinite man. Expanding its conscious, as for the moment he has done, it may even partake of the greater consciousness of the all. Thus the ineffable plan unfolds before him. Each immortal soul perpetually expands the domain of its consciousness and continually increases the power of its control over environment. These separate, evolving units thread together to give more complex expression to universal consciousness and power. As a man becomes stronger when the separate cells of his body gain in vigor, so the expansion, power, and more complete cooperation of souls lend increase of consciousness and power to the cosmic man. Man on earth needs the separate cells of his body and the separate thoughts of his mind. Each has a real and important function to play in his economy. If any are missing, or if they are present but attempt to do the work of others, or fail to do the work assigned to them, the man, as well as the cells, suffers, grasping by his peculiar rapport with the inner planes of life, the relation of parts to the whole in the universal scheme. The spiritual alchemist perceives that likewise every immortal soul has its place and somewhat important function. Universal intelligence depends for expression on the sum of separate intelligences, even as man depends for mental expression on his separate thoughts. Not only does man need God, but stupendous thought though it be, there is need of God for man. Now within the physical body of man, due to his life processes, there are secretions that to avoid disease must be eliminated. Within the domain of his mentality are thoughts that must be expunged to avoid intellectual decay and moral dissolution. We may be sure, therefore, that like conditions exist in the cosmic man. But most of the physical subjects and physical entities embraced within man's empire work for the welfare of their liege and lord and obey his commands. These harmonious, constructive atoms of physical and psychical life within man's constitution are the bulwark of his strength, and realizing this, he cherishes, supports, and encourages them. happy to have them make their homes permanently with him. Thus also, the spiritual alchemist believes the universal creator cherishes, supports, and encourages those who assist his work, and takes pains that they shall not perish and that no real harm shall come to them. Other entities within the scope of man's dominion, there are that on almost every occasion, stir up dissension and strife. These disobedient, disloyal, and disintegrative subjects he finds it necessary to discipline, or if they become too arrogant and thus threaten the whole estate, they must be deported or completely destroyed. The surgeon's knife may be the only recourse to save the life. And in the wider realm of cosmic affairs, the spiritual alchemist perceives rebellious souls, which, like Lucifer, would usurp the supreme authority to themselves and make selfish gratification the highest law. These, he feels sure, are not permitted to endure in their wayward course. Their continued existence depends upon a change of attitude. Only those persist that have some value as constructive workers in carrying out the divine plan. This peculiar, pervading, insistent consciousness attained through spiritual alchemy reveals, in a manner not to be denied by anyone having the experience, that the universal mind has formulated a plan for, and commenced the erection of, the universal structure. It informs him in terms of deep conviction that to oppose the advancement of this cosmic plan is to throw himself athwart the tides of universal life, with the surety that if the course is not altered, they will carry the soul into the realms of extinction. Yet it assures him also of a tremendous immortal career if he becomes a constructive part of the eternal plan. Uniting with deity, he partakes through association with the deific work of the perpetually expanding life and consciousness of the infinite. Thus it is that the spiritual alchemist painstakingly scans the universe in the effort to discern the ineffable plan. He carefully studies himself and assays all his qualities and opportunities to the end that he may find just where in the cosmic work he can be of greatest service. To be of the greatest possible service in furthering God's evolutionary plan becomes the absorbing aim of his life. Thus it is that he walks among men, seeming not different greatly from others, yet taking in regard to most things a diametrically opposite view. For while ordinary men reflect upon every act, motive, and event in terms of their being advantageous or inimical to material success, he regards all these things from a cosmic standpoint, as constructive or destructive factors in universal life. Instead of seeking life eternal from the desire merely to persist in consciousness, he aspires to immortality because he realizes that he may become a valuable workman in the manifestation of the infinite plan. He is a willing laborer under the direction of the universal mind, and his loss would be keenly felt by the progressive legions. He struggles to spiritually endure, not for himself alone, but to add his energy and strength to those cohorts that favor immortality for mankind, and that strive to uphold law and order throughout the universe. Believing that the progress of deity depends upon the progress of the various souls and entities embraced in the structure of the universal man, he considers his own intellectual and spiritual development the training to become a workman of greater skill and value. It is his duty to advance toward perfection, his duty to God above, to innumerable degrees of life below, and to mankind as a whole. Every act of his life is examined, not for its material effect, but for its influence as furthering his soul, development, and the cause of human progress. Every spiritual victory redounds not merely to his own credit, but places in his hands new powers that he may use to benefit his fellowmen. Thus life itself is reduced to the spiritual first matter, and its component parts evaluated by their fitness or unfitness to enter into the composition of transmuted spiritual gold. The components of gold. To make gold, not only must all the materials of which it is composed be present, but before the transmutation is perfected, all must be there in proper proportions. If we apply the law of correspondences, it brings the conclusion that there are 7 of these necessary factors. 7 colors of the solar spectrum combine to produce white light. 7 tones of the scale combine in the production of music. 7 planets constitute the septenary scale of astrological influences. And thus, as 7 is present in those things expressing perfection of form, even in the septenary constitution of man, we may safely conclude it enters into the composition of gold. Man, the climax and point of departure of animate forms on Earth, contains within himself the attributes of all life lower in the scale of being. Gold, the climax of the mineral kingdom, and its point of departure to a higher kingdom, likewise, contains within itself the qualities and attributes of all the other metals. These qualities, even as all shades of color are contained in the 7 prismatic rays, are grouped in the 7 typical metals that most strongly vibrate in unison each with one of the 7 planets of our solar system. to enumerate. Gold itself vibrates to the sun. Silver vibrates to the moon. Mercury, as made reference to in alchemical works, is of two kinds, the metallic mercury and philosophical mercury. The philosophical mercury symbolizes the soul within, but the mercury with which we are here concerned is somewhat more external. It vibrates to the planet Mercury. Copper vibrates to Venus. Iron vibrates to Mars. Tin vibrates to Jupiter, and lead vibrates to Saturn. Within these seven are the qualities developed by all metals, the qualities that enter into the composition of gold. Therefore, if they are combined in proper proportion and properly acted upon alchemically, the product is transmuted gold, following the same steps. But using the metals of spiritual alchemy, we are sure to get the same results on the spiritual plane. These metals of spiritual alchemy are the various experiences of life. All, according to type, fall into one of several natural divisions. That is, the white light of life's combined experiences may readily be separated by the prism of astrological correspondences into 7 distinct groups, or colors. But before there can be the real white light, we are considering there must be present the rays of all 7 colors. Before there can be transmuted gold, there first must be brought together all 7 of the essential metals. Likewise, we may be sure, before there can be spiritual gold, there must be the 7 types of experiences with life. These 7 metals, or groups of experiences, must be collected. They cannot properly be used in just any quantity, but only in certain proportions. They must be purified and separated from their dross. To lower their fusing point, they must be properly combined or fluxed, one against another. Then, to reduce to the first matter, or spiritual substance, the heat of the reverberatory furnace of their cosmic usefulness should be applied. If these steps are all followed, the experiences flow together to form an organized spiritual form, complete in all its functions, an immortal body, which is the sought for spiritual gold. Therefore, as all 7 spiritual metals are necessary in the exalted process, and as all must be raised in vibratory rate by the action of the reverberatory furnace, let us consider separately the nature and relation to cosmic welfare of each, lead. The first metal to be studied, because the most base of all, and therefore the most difficult to reduce to spiritual first matter and transmute, is lead. It is under the dominion of the planet Saturn. We deal, consequently, with all those motives, thoughts, feelings, and experiences that are brought into the life and prompted by this malefic among the planets. As a mineral lead is heavy, dull, and morose, and the planet Saturn brings to the life heavy responsibilities, dull, plodding labor, and a melancholy disposition. It is a metal of extreme malleability, and in life is noted for diplomacy. It quickly tarnishes, incites, that is, to petty and ignoble actions, and stands as a synonym for great specific gravity or selfishness. A major portion of the diseases, sorrows, losses, obstacles, restrictions, poverty, and disappointments in the world are due to its influence. Under the most favorable conditions, it brings gain as the result of painful planning and plodding perseverance, intellectual supremacy through ample reflection and careful thought, and worldly station through subtlety, craftiness, cunning, and unusual foresight. Without this lead in his constitution, man would be destitute of caution, would act without considering the result, would buy without thought of the cost, and would make no provision for the future. He would be headstrong and rash, governed entirely by momentary impulses, and incapable of forming logical conclusions. In spiritual alchemy also it is most important, for the sorrows it brings tend to chasten the soul and may effectively be used to eliminate the dross of sensuality. Before being reduced to its first matter or purified, the typical leaden viewpoint of life is made lucid in the much repeated formula that self-preservation is nature's first law. It is the idea of self-interest, and to be sure, self-interest on any plane is essential to survival, for without desire for life and progress the soul soon succumbs to disintegrative forces. But this is only a partial statement of the more complete law of life. That is, it is only mental lead, still dominated by the thought that all may sink if I may swim. The more complete law takes recognition of the interdependence of all life and the effect of mental attitudes on character. When life is viewed from the standpoint of spiritual lead, the formula is that my only excuse for existence and my only hope of survival in spiritual realms is my value to cosmic society and the service I render to others. This means that from the alchemical standpoint, selfishness always defeats its own ends. For as we strive to aggrandize self at the expense of society, the power of the soul dwindles and we attain less in, spirituality. But when we labor for the welfare of the whole cosmic structure with no thought of our individual interests except insofar as they're essential qualifications for efficiency and unselfish work, we really gain, for we are adding values to the only real and permanent part of ourselves, to our characters. Lead will be lead, and selfishness will be selfishness. And the only way to convince Saturn that he is wrong is to convince him that selfishness does not pay. Let him think, as is commonly taught, that if he is uncharitable here, he will be dealt with harshly in the afterlife, and he will loosen the strings of his purse. Give him to understand that if he does good here on earth, he will be rewarded by a soft berth in heaven, or that whatever acts he performs for or against others will be performed for or against him in a future incarnation, and he is shrewd enough to perceive the selfish advantage of doing good upon the earth. Such appeals are made directly to the lead in man. The spiritual alchemist also operates upon this mental lead, but in a different fashion. Man is selfish only through ignorance, for in his narrow mind persists the idea that it is possible for one to gain some real advantage at the expense of another. Nothing is farther from the truth, and the attempt to do so invariably results in loss greater than the apparent gain. To deprive another unjustly of money does not necessarily weaken him, for if he takes the correct mental attitude toward this loss, what he gains in fortitude may more than recompense him for his material inconvenience. This depends upon the person. But one thing is as certain as the rising and the setting of the sun. It is that such an unjust act reacts upon the character of the doer and impairs the vitality of his soul. Just as Saturn in a birth chart afflicting the luminaries impairs the physical vitality, repetition of such acts will cause chronic diseases that waste the spiritual tissues as certainly as tuberculosis destroys the body. Every selfish act of life means bartering immortal gold for sodden material lead, for material riches and advantages dishonestly gained weigh down the soul and impair its progress, even as lead carried about the person hampers physical action. To act selfishly, when viewed by the torch of knowledge, is really to act directly contrary to self-interest, for the real self-interest cannot but place a greater value upon character, which may become an immortal asset, than upon the ephemeral gain of material things that last but a matter of days. To act unselfishly, when internal relations are considered, is to act in the direction of greatest self-interest, for it builds up the eternal qualities that persist when all earthly wealth has decomposed into the stardust from which it came. Thus, selfishness and unselfishness to the spiritual alchemist become synonyms for ignorance and wisdom, for each really defeats its own purpose. We cannot act selfishly without injuring self, nor can we act truly in an unselfish manner without benefiting self. Lead is lead. And to dissolve lead in the spiritual light, we must place it in the reverberatory furnace of its cosmic relations. By appealing to selfishness, it then becomes convinced of its folly and perceives that golden unselfishness far outweighs in value the leading advantages of physical life. Tin is a metal of silvery white color, malleable, ductile, and offering considerable resistance to the corrosive action of acids. It is under the dominion of the planet Jupiter and has a low melting point. It corresponds in human life to such pure and noble moral sentiments as are of snow-white luster. True nobility of impulse itself is incorruptible, but quickly bends in malleable charity to assist a fallen brother. Its sympathies are drawn in filaments of mercy to the downtrodden and oppressed, and its dignity and reserve are melted at the sight of suffering. Tin, or Jupiter, is the major benefic, bringing to man health, wealth, and affluence. This gain comes without effort, or as the result of favor inspired by good deeds. It is far removed from all that is sordid and harsh, indicating instead good cheer, genial warmth, and generosity. Without tin, or Jupiter, the life of man would be stern and severe. There would be little inclination to assist others, little thought for anything save self. There would be no religion, and no charitable institutions, no paternal kindness, and no mercy. Lead demands payments with usury. Iron demands an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But tin rises to a higher law that permits it to return good for evil. Its thought in life is to live and let live. It aspires to extend the helping hand to all mankind and lift them up through sheer nobility of purpose. We might be led to think that tin, being such a magnanimous metal, is already in a state bordering on spiritual gold, but as a matter of fact, it is somewhat destructive, and also contains much dross that must be purged away in the fires of affliction. Those who pass through life without enduring the sorrows of lead never knowing poverty and illness, ever being cared and provided for, have not the plodding steadfastness necessary for real spiritual attainment. Those who are guarded from all dangers, hedged in by protecting influences, never knowing the strife that comes from iron, have not the aggressiveness, initiative, and daring courage to wrestle with the dweller on the threshold and wage a war of conquest against the angel of eternal death. Tin is proof against the acids of envy and the inroads of remorse, but cannot withstand the heat of dissipation. It is a wondrous and virtuous metal, but virtue being misapplied becomes a vice. It is a less difficult thing to give than to know how to give wisely. To assist others to persist in idleness by unwise giving is as great an error as to selfishly withhold help from the deserving. When a hard struggle to secure bare necessities is a requisite to enable a man to find his own powers, it is a misdemeanor to furnish those necessities gratis. To encourage dissolute habits by furnishing the wherewithal to gratify them is to become a party to the fault. To give and give well requires as great sagacity as to acquire the wealth to give. To act with true generosity is a far more complex matter than is commonly recognized. To be really merciful is not merely to gratify the physical needs of others for food and shelter. It includes more than caring for the sick and providing material education. It necessitates a comprehension of the soul needs of the individual and the satisfying of those needs. It embraces the spiritual meaning of not to spare the rod and spoil the child. Tin must abundantly be present in the storehouse of the spiritual alchemist, but after he combines it with the other metals. Before it enters into the composition of transmuted gold, it must be resolved in the spiritual light to its first. Matter. To apply properly the heat of the reverberatory furnace, he must have the spiritual discernment to foresee the result of his action upon the character of the individual before he extends his hand in help. He must know what assistance the soul needs, and render first aid to the immortal part of man, using material means to accomplish a spiritual purpose. When tin is too largely present, it brings an attitude of I am better than thou, a feeling of righteous pride and a belief that good befalls through some inherent superiority. The evils it encourages are luxurious living, love of display, and an excess of generosity. Iron. Both lead and tin are soft metals, yielding readily to pressure from the outside. Mercury ordinarily is a fluid, and copper, silver, and gold, while having a hardness greater than tin and lead, are not unyielding. Iron, however, is a hard, severe metal capable of great resistance. It is harsh and gray, with a forceful character, but turns to an angry red when exposed to the attacking influence of the elements. Under the heat of affliction, it gives way slowly, having a high melting point, and when so heated and suddenly cooled, is distinguished for developing a temper. With a temper so aroused, it is decidedly self-willed, and cannot be forced to deviate permanently from the course or form it has chosen to assume. So great is this aggressive determination that it may be brought to a state of temper where, if bent from its original shape, it instantly returns to it, as observed in springs. The instant the compelling pressure is removed. Iron, or Mars, is the minor malefic, furnishing man with energy, courage, resistance, aggressiveness, and forcefulness. Other metals are good electric conductors, though, of course, lead is too miserly to permit an electric current to flow through its domain without niggardly opposition. But iron has the distinction of itself, either permanently or temporarily, becoming magnetic. It thus exhibits an independence and force not possessed by other metals. Its great resistance and headlong impetuosity fit it preeminently to become both a tool in the hands of a worker and a weapon in the hands of a warrior. In fact, it may safely be said that all work and all conquest depend upon the amount of iron present. For if iron is lacking, there will be insufficient energy for any worthwhile accomplishment. Without it, any combination of other metals is weak and vacillating and altogether too pliable to serve purposes other than to be molded by such objects as they contact. Consequently, it is very important in spiritual alchemy that there be plenty of iron in the metallic fusion, yet we cannot use iron in its common corrupted state. First, the rust must be removed and cast aside. Iron in character represents the selfish and animal propensities and the destructive and constructive faculties. Without iron, man would be a constant slave to fear and anxiety. He would lack the ability to struggle to attain his purpose and be in a state of perpetual dread. It commonly manifests in life as intense desires, but as action is ever in the direction of the strongest desire, the effort should never be made to kill desires, but to divert them into channels that are individually constructive and that work for the welfare of all. No great thing was ever accomplished without enthusiasm, and where iron is not, neither is. their enthusiasm. Survival depends not merely upon lead or caution, but also upon iron, upon the ability to dare and fight and struggle and resist outside influences. Even temper is a most valuable asset when well controlled, for it permits of an elastic rebound. A man with this kind of temper can never be kept down, for he rises as soon as he falls. He no more accepts defeat as final than does the steel spring when it is flexed. Iron is valuable alike for destruction and construction, but to be useful in spiritual alchemy, it must be reduced to its first matter and spiritual substance. It must be used not merely as a weapon of physical defense, but to destroy the pernicious and licentious thoughts that menace the soul. It must be used to tear down and destroy such forms of belief and such social conditions as threaten the spiritual life of society, and tempered to a sword of finest steel, it must be turned against the legions of darkness that infest the lower astral realms. Placed in the reverberatory furnace from time to time, it must then be forged into an implement of construction. Positive, aggressive spiritual thoughts must dominate the soul, must labor to spread the light of truth, must incite to persistent effort in behalf of society, and must become true constructive instruments in the erection of the edifice of the cosmos. Copper. Copper is a metal of reddish color, soft, pliable, yielding, and a good conductor of heat and electricity. It is even a better conductor of electric force than iron, but is incapable of retaining that force and itself becoming energetic. Iron is a harsh, forceful metal, but copper is mild and gentle. It presents a pleasing comparison to lead, being bright, cheerful, and happy, while lead is somber, gray, sullen, reserved, and frowning. Like tin, copper exhibits its most pronounced virtues when associated with other metals. It is truly the metal of union, for it is always more contented when alloyed with another. It thus entirely lacks that independence of character that distinguishes iron, and must ever have a stronger companion upon which to lean. As a component of bronze, it is of great value in the arts. Copper, or Venus, is the minor benefic, furnishing man with compassion, affection, refinement, and a love of the artistic and beautiful. It lends a pleasing aspect to every metal with which it associates in human life, bringing friendship, mirthfulness, amiability, and conjugality. It is especially useful in brazing, that is, strengthening the union between other metals or between their parts. Similarly, it exerts itself in society to draw people into harmonious companionship. It is the metal of love, presenting, when uncorrupted, the bright and cheery aspect of goodwill, very unlike the hard, gray tone of iron, which normally is cold and cruel, and when exposed to the elements, becomes a dull, passionate red. Copper, however, while less easily tarnished and sullied than iron, is readily affected by acids of various sorts. When so attacked, it degenerates into the vile verdigris of jealousy, a slimy green corruption that soils wherever it touches. In this impure state, it is a rank poison which may be used as a paint on boats to destroy barnacles, as the diseases it engenders spread in the dissolution of the barnacles of society. Or, as Paris green, it is sprinkled on growing vines to kill the insects that infest them. The parasites among the human race also fall victims to its virulence. It was this noisome poison, the product of corrupted copper, that resulted in the downfall of Rome. The Paris green of luxury and licentiousness ate into her vitals and poisoned her soul, and she fell through weakness. Her vitality so sapped by this noxious, impure copper that she was left an easy prey to outside foes. Copper, in spiritual alchemy, represents experiences with love, sympathy, and affection. The world would be a harsh, bleak land without the refining influence of copper. There would be no appreciation of beauty, no knowledge of harmony, none of the softer shadings of life that soothe the sting of adversity. There might be the joviality characteristic of tin, but ties of love and affection would be lacking. There might be strenuous action and fiery passion springing from iron, but no grace in those movements, and only selfishness at the base of desire. Without copper, the world would be the scene of perpetual conflict, of strife without surcease, for it is the metal of peace. It is the only direct antidote for a surplus of lead, for insofar as love is present, selfishness departs. Its peculiar property is that of giving strength and endurance and life to other metals, such as bronze, which is an alloy with tin, and to brass, which is an alloy with zinc. In alchemical combinations also it lends itself to permanence. and a magical ring or an amulet of metal to retain its potencies must not only contain gold and silver, but a small portion of copper. It is the love element which retains the magical force and binds the gold and silver in permanent union, permitting the interaction of magnetic forces between them. The organs of the body retain their life and perform their functions only so long as organic copper unites the separate cells that compose them and binds new cells to the old to replace those decomposed by iron, disintegrated by rust. There can be no complete and permanent union on any plane unless copper is present as the binding material. Transmuted gold is produced from a union of other metals. The importance of copper cannot be overestimated in spiritual alchemy. While impure, it cannot be reduced to the first matter, for the spiritual light finds no point of contact with copper that is corrupted. But when pure, it resolves with almost no heat from the reverberatory furnace into the spiritual state. In this condition, it readily enters into union with other spiritualized metals and never fails to add to their utility. It is very easy to mistake other elements for pure copper, and the spiritual alchemist must take unusual pains to secure it undefiled and in ample volume to thoroughly bind together the other metals. But when once obtained, many of his difficulties are over, for it is not difficult to transmute. Mercury. Mercury is notable among the metals in that at ordinary temperatures it is a fluid, the particles of which are set in rapid movement by the least outside influence. The fleetness of its drops, as well as the swiftness of the planet, is well symbolized by the wings on the feet of this ancient messenger of the gods. A little quicksilver spilled in the laboratory and its drops are everywhere, elusive, quick-moving, and of brilliant silver-white luster. Mercury is the planet of the mind, and Mercury is the metal of wonderful penetration. Its particles rarely find egress through substances that are impervious to other metals. It may be strained through buckskin, or even through a chamois skin bag, and the minutely divided particles will again immediately unite. Even as man's thoughts penetrate the inmost recesses of nature and after their separate work of exploration collect again to become a conviction, the perceptions of man are many diverse beads of quicksilver which when brought together unite in a single shining concept. It is the most unstable of our metals, and volatilizes at a very low heat into white vaporous fumes. Similarly, are man's thoughts quickly accelerated by the fires of enthusiasm, to soar aloft into more tenuous realms, leaving the dull cares of earth behind. Thus also, under the heat of impassioned idealism, do they rise to the altitude of eloquence. Mercury is a volatile, changeable, fickle, persuasive metal. Being liquid, it conforms to every surface upon which it rests, and readily adapts itself to every circumstance of life. Nor does it stop with mere conformity to contour, but has the peculiar property of forming amalgams with other metals. So blended, it takes upon itself the properties and qualities of whatsoever metal with which united. So also is the mind of man colored and influenced by its contact with the external world. Its trend at any given moment is governed by its transitional contacts, which operate upon it through the well-known laws of association. Mercury has a wonderful power to reflect light, and for this reason is used as a coating for mirrors. The mind, likewise, has the power of reflecting, mirroring on its surface the image of all it perceives in its contact with the world. When heated, our metal is converted into a white gas, which has a number of uses in common chemistry, almost as many as have thoughts inspired by zealous enthusiasm in the chemistry of the cosmos. But these fumes, when breathed, produce in the human organism a peculiar blackening of the gums, called salivation, accompanied by the falling out of the teeth. The teeth and bony structure of the body come under the dominion of lead. They correspond to that which is practical. The mind, or Mercury, dominated by religious enthusiasm or by mystical zeal, sometimes becomes feverish, and the thoughts volatilize into imaginative vaporings. These mental fumes attack the social structure and result in loss of practicality. Man should not forget that so long as there is a physical body to nourish, he has need of teeth with which to masticate physical food. To inhale the fickle fumes of imagination in too great quantity is to get too far from earth, is to become an invalid and a burden to society through speculative salivation. That is, when he loses sight of the practical, he becomes a romantic visionary, lacking teeth with which to attack the essential problems of everyday life. The reflective powers of Mercury are utilized in medicine to eliminate the impurities from the body, just as they are used mentally to purify the mind. I refer to the purgative, calomel, which is a compound of mercury and chlorine. Chlorine is an acid which readily attacks all metals. Mercury in combination with chlorine partakes of its nature and attacks and eliminates from the system whatever it directly contacts. Calomel is the purgative most prevalently used by physicians of the old allopathic school of medicine, and is the method almost exclusively employed by the old school scientists. On the mental plane, it is the power of destructive criticism. More progressive investigators have arrived at the conclusion that in many cases it does more harm than good, injecting a deadlier poison than the one it removes. This is true in science as well as in medicine, for the criticisms often do not discriminate between the refuse that should be removed from the physical and mental constitution and those valuable tissues upon which life itself depends. The spiritual alchemist utilizes both the penetrative or perceptive qualities of Mercury and the reflective attributes. He learns the nature, purity, and value of other metals by associating them with Mercury. Amalgams with other metals are not impurities, but all perishable elements, those not grounded in the very truth of things, are impurities. Mercury may readily be dissolved into the first matter in the reverberatory furnace, but it first must be freed from impurities. Silver. Silver is a bright, white metal that, although readily attacked by certain acids, does not tarnish under ordinary conditions. It is one of the so-called precious metals, and as such is used for currency among civilized nations. In the human body, it is represented by the nutritive functions. Both in society and in the life of the individual, gold supplies the vitality and silver furnishes the food for subsistence. Nations rely upon gold as the bulwark of their financial structure, but silver is the medium of exchange with which homes are supplied with food, and which keeps the wheels of industry turning. This metal is ruled by the moon. In spiritual alchemy is the domestic impulses and the experiences with parenthood. These experiences, when properly purified, need but little heat from the reverberatory furnace to reduce them to the spiritual first matter. They then become, indeed, the nutrition of the soul. Children, to be sure, require watchful care, but responsibilities have a way of developing the ability to successfully bear them. But the chief value of alchemical silver is in the awakening of tender affections that are untinged with self-interest. Parental love is one of the most potent agencies known for displacing selfishness with devotion to the welfare of another. It thus gives a foretaste of the blessed afterlife commonly spoken of as heaven. As silver is very negative, that is, plastic and yielding, too much of it impairs initiative and hinders transmutation, yet is unusually durable, as witness its use in coinage, for it corresponds to imperishable factors that persist even into the life to come. Parenthood and the home are not merely institutions of earth, but correspond to spiritual verities. Domestic life is something more than just a social expedient. It is the material shadow of conditions on the spiritual plane that hold the most glorious possibilities. In addition to being receptive and a good conductor of heat and electricity, silver has a markedly pleasing resonance. This resonance is exemplified in the lives of those who expand parental love to embrace some larger section of the human race. These beneficent individuals respond to and vibrate in unison with pulsations emanating from the spiritual plane. This kind of silver readily enters into the composition of transmuted gold. Gold is a bright, glittering metal of imperishable nature. It is unattacked by any single acid and is unaffected in its quantity by fire. These unusual qualities are its mark of distinction, and we search for them throughout the material realm and in the character of man to find that which is capable of being converted into gold. We may be sure that whatever partakes of these qualities, and only such things, therefore, as are immortal and imperishable, may become a permanent part of the body of spiritual man, and thus be transmuted into gold. Gold is ruled by the sun, and thus represents also the vital principle of all life. It is the central, governing authority, the foundation of the financial structure of society, and the source of power both in physical and in spiritual man. The natural gold in the human constitution is the ego, imperishable and as pure as pristine sunlight. But there is another gold that is not the ego, yet that partakes of its enduring nature. This is not the material gold that some strive to make in the chemical shops of the earth. It is a spiritual gold, that is, a gold like unto the ego in its spirituality and continuance. It is even possible to convert, through proper purification, combination, and heating, every event of life into this most precious metal. It is possible to use every experience as a spiritual metal that enters into the building up of a spiritual form. This immortal body is the transmuted spiritual gold, purifying the metals, To become a spiritual alchemist, one must take a very different view of life from that held by the rest of the world. Life and all its experiences must be considered from the inner plane of realities, for realities alone can be raised in intensity of vibra, on to the plane of spiritual substance, and there persist as portions of the immortal spiritual body. The attachment to appearances must forever be severed. When seen from this higher plane, the things upon which more worldly people dote, and for which they ceaselessly toil and struggle, are recognized to be but the dross of life that must be skimmed from the various molten metals of experience and cast into the waste of perishable debris. These very things that men set their hearts upon, when more closely scrutinized, are observed to be but the scum that rises to the surface of life's pure metals when they are melted by the fires of the reverberatory furnace of their cosmic relations. This refuse must be skimmed from the pure and transcendent values that lie beneath it and cast to one side, but the metals themselves, thus recognized and separated from the dross, should be preserved with the utmost care as priceless spiritual possessions. Every experience of life from the cradle to the grave, yea, and every experience of the life to come when the soul shall have passed through the river of physical dissolution, is composed of two parts, real metal and corruptible dross. And it is possible with each experience to separate the dross and the real metal and operate upon either and entirely neglect the other. The vast majority of mankind preserve only the dross and unwittingly discard the part of real value. Consequently, their possessions tarnish, or if placed in the fiery furnace of cosmic usefulness, turn to ashes, perishing and leaving them poor indeed. But the spiritual alchemist carefully and patiently searches each experience of life as it comes to him for the bead of real metal that is sure to be hidden amid the rubbish and debris of its external effects. Ofttimes this rarer portion is but a glowing speck embedded in a mass of confused impurities. Nevertheless, it is well worth the effort of its recovery. Each grain of unsullied metal added to the priceless collection of years is so much that will never be lost and never be taken away, for it finally will be converted into an ineffable and glorious effulgence, called by the learned spiritual gold. Real metal distinguished from dross. As students of spiritual alchemy, let us now learn to discriminate between real metal and dross. The real metal is the underlying reality of each experience, that is, its effect upon the soul, while the dross is the apparent condition, the material effect, which is the cloak of seeming with which every reality in existence is clothed. All too often, for instance, we speak of a man as if H were merely an entity of flesh and blood, while in reality he is soul and spirit, and the physical body is but the garment of manifestation which covers the character. We commonly say that the man is sick, when in reality it is only his body that is ill, and thus we confuse the dross with the real metal. It is true that a man may be sick, for his soul may be corroded with the rusty scales of lust, prostrated with the lead poison of greed, corrupted with the verdigris of sensuality, or tarnished with the impure tin of self-indulgence, but to these it is less common to refer. Men walk through life apparently image of bodily health, yet with souls that truly fester, but so blinded to reality are most people that they can see only the perishable covering that hides such conditions, as inwardly. So long as we consider a man fortunate or unfortunate without appraising the effect of events and conditions upon his soul, we are mistaking dross for the pure metal, for the dross relates to external life, and the true metal only concerns the soul. When we accept it as possible for one man to be injured by another, we are accepting appearances for reality, for no one is injured in his real nature except by his own permission. But if I take the attitude of a spiritual alchemist, I realize that another may torture my body, or place me in prison, yet he cannot injure me thereby, unless in my ignorance I mistake my body for my real self. I realize that the soul is the only true self, and that it is impossible for anyone to in any way affect my soul except through my own consent. Thus it is that either in wisdom or in ignorance, we give the unspoken nod of our approval to every event that constitutes a real metal of life, that has any influence upon the soul J for the event. Itself has no power to affect the soul except through the attitude of the soul toward it. The same event happening to two persons may readily be considered from diametrical standpoints, and thus, because viewed from different planes, have exactly the opposite effect on the inner self of one from that which it exerts on the other. For instance, the inheritance of a fortune may lead one person to a life of ease, luxury, and licentiousness, J, while leading another into a life devoted to welfare work, charity, and philanthropic endeavor. The effect on the soul of one is exactly the opposite of the effect on the soul of the other. It is not the inheritance that causes these effects. It is the attitude toward the inheritance. And thus it is with all events. J, it is not the things which happen that affect us, but only our mental attitude toward those things. The spiritual alchemist goes even a step further than this. He believes that it is only when we confuse our bodies and material possessions with our true selves that we become the slaves of circumstance. Freedom from the bondage of environment depends upon our recognition of the distinction between our real selves and real obligations and the external form and the responsibilities that some seek to assume, but which in truth belong to nature. I do not mean that man can always control the events of the external world. He can do this to a limited degree, and he should strive to increase his ability to overcome such external restrictions as are imposed by environment. But there are many events far beyond